The Chair recognises the honourable member for Mount Pearl Southlands.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's great to have the opportunity once again to speak today. And of course, we're still on interim supply, and while I do agree with the points being made by my colleagues here, I've taken the approach that we're not going to stop interim supply. So if someone's going to speak, it may as well be me, as opposed to listening to the government speak all day. So, especially when you have issues to raise. So, I just want to talk about an issue that hasn't been talked about for quite some time in the House Assembly. It doesn't get a whole lot of attention, while I do believe it should get some attention, and that's the issue around workers' compensation. And of course, Madam Chair, workers' compensation is an insurance program, as we all know, for workers who get injured on the job, or workers who are, victims of industrial disease and so on that occurs at the workplace. And as we know, workers, well, there's three, basically, three principles of workers' comp. Number one, it's 100% employer paid, so it's not costing any money to the taxpayer. Secondly, it's no-fault insurance, so regardless of who is at fault when the workplace accident or incident occurs, whether it's the employer's fault, the employee's fault, or some combination thereof, there's going to be coverage as long as it's a workplace injury. And of course, the final one, and an important one, is the fact that injured workers do not have the right to sue. The minute that an injured worker accepts their claim, puts in a claim and is accepted, then they automatically give up their right to sue the employer for any kind of negligence which may or may not have occurred and led to that injury. So they become very dependent on that system. And there's no doubt that there's cases, I'm sure, I know of cases. I worked as a safety practitioner, that's what I did for a living prior to being an MHA. And I've worked on both sides of the workers' comp side. I've worked on behalf of employers that I represented as an employer rep on workers' comp cases. And as an MHA, as I'm sure many MHAs here, probably all MHAs, have had the opportunity to represent injured workers in their districts. And there's a lot of times when, you know, a worker perhaps, because nobody goes to work planning on getting hurt. Nobody goes to work planning on getting hurt or coming down with some kind of an industrial disease after years of working, years of exposure. But they become very dependent, because even if it was something that was absolutely negligent on behalf of the employer, they have no choice but to put in that claim, because they can't, even if they wanted to sue, they really can't, because it could be tied up in the courts for 2 or 3 years, and how do they live in the meantime? How do they pay the bills? How do they feed their family? So they're kind of forced to put in that claim, and to get that claim in there, and once it's accepted, then they're bound by it and whatever benefits they would derive from it, and they don't have the opportunity to sue at all. So once they're in that system, that's where they're stuck, basically. And then they're very dependent on that system. And in a lot of cases, there are issues that arise where there are differences of opinion, of course, you know, with different physicians and specialists, and of course, workers' comp and the employee. And a lot of times, these issues take an inordinate amount of time to get sorted through. And in the meantime, while we're trying to sort through all this, here you have a person who is home, they're injured, there's no money coming in through the door to pay for, you know, their expenses and to look after their family and their bills and so on. And we find an awful lot of workers who get caught up in the system. We find an awful lot of workers who get caught up in the system, and an awful lot of workers who come to us looking to appeal various aspects of things because they felt that they were treated unfairly, they felt they were treated unjust. Now, I would say, like every system, there are very legitimate situations, and there is some abuse, without a doubt. Now, people, unfortunately, a lot of people in society stereotype that injured worker and say, oh, they're lazy and they don't want to go to work and whatever, and that's unfair. Does it happen? Absolutely. There is not a system that can be put in place that somebody won't find a way to abuse it and will abuse it. It will always happen. There will always be that percentage. But there are an awful lot of people, an awful lot of legitimate claims and people who are suffering in the system known as workers' compensation. And one of the issues that we had, of course, was the appeal mechanism through the commissioners. And we found out that basically the issue, and under the legislation, if you want to appeal a decision of workers' comp, of your caseworker makes a decision, you want to appeal it, you disagree, first you go through the internal appeal, then you go to the external commissioner. And there was a real backup. That's under legislation supposed to be dealt with in 90 days, but we found out that there's cases outstanding for 6 months, a year, even longer than that. But to the minister's credit, I will say, I did write the minister of the day and raise the issue, and I've had conversations with the Workers' Comp Appeal Board, and to the minister's credit, they did, I'm glad to see, they were down to 3 commissioners. I think they're up to 5 now, and there's 2 more that are in the process of being hired in some of the rural areas, I think Grand Falls, maybe Corner Brook or what have you. So that is being addressed, and I'm glad to hear that. I acknowledge that. Something we've been calling on for a long time, something I called on as critic, and it's happening, and that's a positive thing. But what I really want to get down to is, under the workers' comp system, we have an automatic review process. It happens, I'm sure it was every 4 years or every 5 years, that there's a statutory review of the workers' comp legislation. And through that process, there's a process set up where they go around the province, they have consultations, injured workers can come and make presentations and so on. There's an independent committee. Last time it was made up of someone from Labour, someone from, I think it was from the Federation of Labour, if I'm not mistaken, someone from the Employers' Council, I believe, representing employers, and the chair of the commission, who was Mr. Tucker at the time. And they went around, that was the last one that was done, and they took submissions, reviewed legislation, and then they come back with a report and recommendations, a list of recommendations of things we need to change to make the workers' compensation system better, to improve it for the injured worker and for the employers. Now, we have gone through that process twice in the last 8 years or 9 years, whatever it is. We've gone through 2 of these statutory reviews. And both of those statutory reviews, to my knowledge, for the most part, are sitting on shelves collecting dust, and there's been very little done. Now, I'll give kudos once again to the government and the former minister and so on. One of the things that were outstanding in the last 2 reports was presumptive cancer for firefighters. And to the government's credit, they said they were going to do it. They announced it in the budget, and we brought the legislation in, and we all approved it because it was the right thing to do, and it was a positive thing to do. And again, I commend the government for doing it. But there are still so many outstanding recommendations in 2 statutory reviews that just been nothing done with. I haven't seen any legislation come forward. And these are recommendations, like I said, we've done public consultations, consulted with employer groups, labour groups, independent committee made up of employers, made up of unions, made up of the chair of the board, and they collectively agreed on recommendations to improve things. So my question is, with all these recommendations, why aren't they implemented? Why is there not legislation coming before the House, in addition to presumptive cancer, which again was a great thing? Why are there not more recommendations coming forward, legislation to improve the system for injured workers? And I know we have a new minister now, Service NL, and I'm sure he'll be looking into this and looking into these reports and recommendations, and I'm hoping that we're going to see some
Order, please.
legislation coming before the House in the
Order,
not-too-distant
please.
future. Thank you.
I remind the honourable